When I wrote my second book, Mug and Tweet, the idea was social communication in the digital age. And social communication is not communication that we only do on social media. Social media is just a tool that we use to communicate in this age. So hence social communication in the digital age. Social communication, however, goes back a very long time. It's the way we originally communicated. It's the way our forefathers and our ancestors communicated. So today I just want to look at social communication, try and unpack it and simplify it a little bit so that you can have a better understanding to make you a more effective communicator. If I had to ask you a question, are you professional or social? What would you say? And many people, and it depends on the audience that we're speaking to, if they're in a corporate situation, they'll often say, I'm a professional person. And my question is, are you professional or are you social? And really, at the end of the day, the answer to that is you should be a social person who's professional at all times. If you allow yourself to be professional and then occasionally social, well, generally you let yourself down at some stage, and that's where things can go wrong. This is a strange graphic, but it's interesting that this is how education originally was formulated to make a perfect factory worker. What happened was they basically asked you to leave your brain at the door and come in with your hands. That was fine because you were producing products and doing all those sort of things, but the real thing that we do now, and the real idea that we would like you to come to work with now, is come with your brains, and you can almost leave your hands at the door. We need you to use your hands, but really we want you to use your brain. We want you to think. We want you to be creative. In creative thinking, and I want you to think creatively now, what is this? And if your little child or your grandchild had to come to you and say, what is this? Typically we would tell them it's a paintbrush. And unfortunately, we'd be wrong. Because the reason why we'd be wrong is that we haven't taken the child's opinion into account. What did they think it was? And that's the question. What do you think it is, my child? What do you think it is? What is it? Ask the child, what do they think it is? Because by telling them exactly what it is, you've crushed the creativity in that moment. So ask the child, what do you think it is? And there's a potential for them to say that it's an ice cream, that it could be a lollipop, it could be a tree. Now, why could it be a tree? Because if you look at the illustration here, you'll see that's how children draw trees. It's like small at the bottom and thin, it's got wood just like the brush, and then it goes bigger at the top. And that could be a lollipop, could be an ice cream, could be a tree. By asking the child what they think it is, they will tell you what they think it is. You can then say, I understand why you see it as an ice cream or a lollipop or a tree. And then you can say, and mom uses this brush to put makeup on her face. What you've never done here is you've never made this child wrong in this process. You've taken into account what they thought it was, and then you have given them an option to possibly, this could be a tree for them. Although you know it's not a tree, but they then think, well, this tree, mom puts her makeup on her face. Funny mom, but that's how it is. So that's just, all things, ask more questions than giving answers. See, when you give an answer, you err almost to being right and not taking the other person's opinion into account. Social communication can be defined as the interactions that occur within social and business relationships. That is what social communication is. So it's about interaction. It's about conversations and communications that become effective within these social and business relationships. This slide is about the media revolution. You see, although the printing press was designed and first built in the 1600s, it never came into a mass effect until the early 1800s. And that's when we had mass media. Now, mass media was around with us for about 200 years. It ended around about the year 2000 when sort of Net 2 arrived, and at that stage, people could then consume their own media. They didn't have to rely on mass media, and it could have been that could have been propaganda. Now they'll sit and find their own thing. So if you think of a picture of the people reading newspapers on the train, and people with cell phones on the train, that's quite a different scenario, because in the newspaper, typically they could be reading the news as they see it, and that's the news that was given to them for the day. When the children are sitting, or people are sitting on their phones on a train, for instance, as in this picture, everyone is almost consuming different messages. They're either talking to their friends, using channels like WhatsApp, they might be on Twitter, they might be on Facebook. They are consuming different information, which actually then makes them different. And it doesn't mean that they any worse or any better than the people reading newspapers. It's just that now mass media has gone and we can choose the media that we want. Social media is about engagement. The engagement between two people, as in this picture, then becomes the media for everyone else. So the more effective we can make our engagement, we're talking to each other, and although we know each other, the way we should approach it is very much like an interview. So if you ask me a question, I should repeat some of that question back to you in my reply to make that relevant to the people that are observing, because social communication and social media only becomes media when there are observers. So if it's just two people having a private conversation in something like WhatsApp, that is not necessarily social media. It's a social communication. Once it's open and other people can access that conversation, then it becomes actual social media. And then it has an effect, and then it has that mass and a knock-on effect, and many people can potentially see it. Social media can be likened to a municipal pipeline, a municipal water system. Now, when you turn on your tap at home, what you expect is simple, clean water that comes out of there. And that's what you pay for, that's what you expect. But can you imagine if you turned on that tap and there was rust? One of the things is that the reason why there would be rust is maybe you haven't used that tap often enough, and the water's just got old and rusty and stale in that pipe. Social media, and the way we need to look at it, is people are expecting good, clean water from you all the time when they need it. So if they turn on that tap, the media just flows to them. If you are a bit rusty, they're going to get a little bit of rusty water that's not exactly what they expected. If you can't be a source of good, clean information for them, they might go somewhere else. And at the same time, when you turn on your taps, you definitely don't expect sewage. Okay, you want good, clean information. So don't give people sewage, give them some consistency that's going to give them good, clean water. That's the way to look at social media. Keep the stream consistent, to start with something and keep it going. So if you've decided to post 2 or 3 times a day, do that every day. There's no substitute for consistency. People expect consistency. It builds relationships, consistency. That's what forms our trust in relationships. When you know someone's consistent, when they will always be there, when you can rely on them, that's what forms trust, and that's what builds relationships. We all think. Oh yes, we all think. But the problem is, do we actually think about what we think about when we think? So do we take time to ponder what we actually think? Or do we just allow the 10,000 thoughts or more sometimes in our minds just to bombard us on a daily basis? What we really need to do is just take a thought captive and say, what do I think about that? Does it make sense? So often you'll hear people saying things and you just have to stop for a moment and say, but hang on, what do they actually mean by that? Sometimes it's obvious. Sometimes it's not obvious, and sometimes you'll need to actually ask that person, what are they thinking? We should never be scared to ask questions. Being on social media is, as one professor said, it's like being in a strange country. Now when we go to a strange country, it's very interesting. We would not do everything that we do in our own country. We'd be a little bit more cautious, a little bit more scared. When we're on social media, we must always remember we're not in our own country. We're not in our own homes. We're in an unfamiliar country. And that's the way we should see it. We don't know what's out there, so rather be cautious than just do whatever you think. So get the message out there, but make sure that you are being just that little bit more careful. And that'll always stand you in good stead on social media. Don't look for the ideas that'll confirm your thinking. Rather look for the trends that'll disrupt your thoughts. We as people, unfortunately, have been taught things and we have a problem with unlearning things. Now, because we think it's done that way, we look for ideas that confirm the way we want to think. However, we should be thinking differently. So going back to what I said just now, do we think about what we think about when we think? It's important that we should look for trends. However, don't allow trends to be so rigid for you that you sort of wait for things to happen. Trends are not there to be the bell that rings to remind you about something. Okay? So you can imagine if you're going to wait to tell your partner that you love them and you're going to wait for Valentine's Day or their birthday or some other event, you're not consistent. That when we say look for the trends that will disrupt your thoughts, let those things remind you, but still carry on innovating. Speak to people. Find out what's new and look for things and maybe even look for trends before they happen so that if you want to communicate around trends and talk about things that are trending, at least you understood them before they actually happened and you're not sort of in the back of it. Because if you want to be newsworthy, you have to be very close to the trend. And you don't always have to just talk about trends. You can talk about things that are important. And sometimes things that are universally important will always stay universally important. And sometimes that's a lot easier than to try and do trend hopping. In this graphic, it's the big wide world of social media with all the platforms and all the landscapes. But you'll notice that there's one important part of this landscape, and that is you. Without you, there is no social media landscape. But the big thing we've got to remember when we're looking at you is that it's not about you. So you're not a celebrity online. You're more like the leader. And interesting enough, if you think about Twitter, it says, follow me. That's a very arrogant statement if you have to think of it. It's like, follow me. When you've said to someone, follow me, what have you actually asked? You've said to them that you're a leader. And when you said you're a leader, that means they've got to follow you and they're going to get some benefit from following you. So it's always about service. It's never about you. It's what the people want, not what you want to give them. Is safe the new risky? Very interesting question. Play it too safe, and you risk the fact of just being boring. And it's been done before. Why should they follow you? Why should they engage with you? Because everyone's doing that, because it's safe. Sometimes you have to look at new things, ways of being controversial, challenging the status quo, breaking the rules. That's going to help you to be noticed and to build your brand. If you stay safe, it could be very risky. If you don't listen, you don't sell anything. Carolyn Marland. It's interesting because we need to listen. In fact, Tom Peters says selling is 80% listening. And if you think about it, it's not just selling. 80% of our success is listening. We're not sure what the other 20% is, but when I went to school, 80% was pretty good. And if I got 80%, I really didn't worry about the other 20% that I didn't get. So if you think about it, listen, get 80% of your success, sales success, relationship success, whatever success you're looking for, you don't have to worry about the other 20%. That'll fall into place if it's valuable. So just listen. When we talk, we are saying what we think people want to hear and not saying what they would like to hear. So you've got to ask yourself out of that one, what do they want to hear? That's the obvious question that comes out of that. What do they want to hear? If you listened and you spent 80% of your time listening, you would know all the answers. You would know exactly what they want. You could give them short, succinct answers. You wouldn't have to keep asking questions if you listen carefully, but you would still ask questions just to clarify things. You would know pretty well what you wanted to tell them because you've listened. Weak brands are intellectual. They try to impress you with facts. Strong brands are emotional. They listen to your needs. A little example here, you can imagine I've just heard about a new diet pill. Probably I need it, but I'm not really into diet pills. But you can imagine I've just found this new diet pill and I found it on the internet and I've been reading all about this diet pill. I've read all the clinical reports. I've looked at the tests and there's been lots of recommendations from different medical staff all over the world and professors and all that. And I say to you, this is the product. This is the one that's really good to diet with. And you're going to go, right, I've heard all the facts, but Richard, what are you really saying? Have you used this product? And if I go, no, I haven't used this product, there's no emotion in that. There's only facts, and you're going to go, well, let me know how it goes after you've used the product. Emotions sell. That's what we've got to understand. There is really no need for facts if you cannot bring through the emotion in your communication. Communication is 80% emotion. 20%, the other 20% of that is about 13% is body language and the things we see, and 7% of that is actual verbal. So 80% is limbic or emotional communication. That's how powerful it is. So never disregard emotional communication from anything that you do. This is the social triad. This is the basics of social media. It always starts with the you in the middle, and we spoke about that earlier. You've got your followers. If you've got no followers, you've got no one to communicate with. Obviously, the content there is what you are communicating with those followers. You'll notice there that your followers are attracted to your content. Once you start interacting with those followers, you'll then be listening to them, you'll hear their needs, and by giving them what they need, you'll build relationships. And we need to be constantly getting new followers because people will get tired of what we do. It's like people when you write a book. Your first book will be interesting. The second one, if it's on the same sort of content, they will get tired of that. So you've got to constantly get new followers in so that you can, in marketing terms, open up the top of your pipeline to get new customers in, new people into your network, new influence. All of those things are needed as a basic. Innovation in practice. How do we look at innovation in practice? Because and when I say innovation in practice, it's communication in practice. What do we do to innovate? What do we do to actually, what are we looking for when we talk about those trends that disrupt your thought? How are we going to disrupt people's thoughts? There's 5 basic primal needs. These are the things that people need on a daily basis. They have different needs, and we're going to look at those needs now. So these are the 5 primal needs. Keep calm and follow directions. People need direction. Men know they should ask for directions. They generally don't. We should all be asking for direction. And if we're dealing with men, then we should preempt that and know that they're not going to ask for the direction, so we should probably give them the directions and make it as simple as possible so that they're more inclined to read the direction. And that can be some of your content that you put out there. Give some of the information that people would like to hear about your products. Discuss things with people. Have discussions, conversations. Get the conversations going. Perhaps you want to have a tweet chat. Perhaps you want to have an online forum that you're going to do on LinkedIn or something like that. But get things going in conversations. People like to know they're included in the conversation. And remember, when you're having a conversation, don't think that you've got all the answers. You might be the expert, but allow people to answer. Allow people to ask the simpler questions. It's going to make things a lot easier, a lot more flowing. People will be less intimidated, so they'll ask better questions, and you'll get a lot more momentum happening in your conversation. And remember that although you might just be speaking to one person in that conversation, you're looking for the broader audience that's going to engage in that conversation. Distraction is another primal need. People love comedy. They love to see funny things. So distract them in some way. Distract them from their norm. And that's another way of keeping your followers entertained with content. It doesn't have to be your own. You can share other people's jokes and other people's videos and those type of things. But get your people engaged with you in a distractive way. Allow people to be themselves. And that's what the primal needs are. Just fit in to what people want. Discovery. People love to discover new things. So it might be showing them new products that you've got, new destinations. It might be, if it's an individual brand, places that you actually visited. They like to see what other people did. They like recommendations from other people around products. The value of story comes into discovery as well. So what stories are you telling people? How are you allowing them to have an experience around the brand? And remember that if the story didn't exactly happen to you, you can curate that story by going out, using your cell phone, taking a video of the person. There's often a challenge with language. The best way to do a video, because remember I said earlier, 80% of our communication is emotional communication. Let's say it's some language that you don't understand, but you know that the story was there. People have told you about this. Interview the person with the original story in the language that they speak, and then put subtitles at the bottom of your screen. Not only have you brought through the emotion and the story, but you've also connected with people that are potentially deaf, because you've put subtitles on the bottom of the screen, and you've broadened yourself to a wider audience. Look for opportunities to allow people to discover you through different mediums and means. Always look for those opportunities. That's where primal needs become real in stories. Allow people to declare things. Now, declaration is typically, people have a need to say things. Allow them to say things. They don't necessarily need an answer. They just need to say things. Allow them to, give them a platform to say things. Sometimes people will send you a message and it's ambiguous. You really don't need to answer them. Just allow them, give them the platform, acknowledge it, but give them that space to have that declaration. Leadership, it's all about the people. There is no servant leadership, for instance. You've got to think service before you can, and serve the people before you can be a leader. That is what it's about. And this is about social communication, but leadership is all about communication. So think about how you can communicate with people, because that'll build your influence. Are you still looking for a trend? I know we hear so much about trends, but I really want to encourage you not to look for trends. But you know what? I understand. So I'm going to give you a trend. Consistency. That's the trend. If you want a trend and you really need a trend, your trend's consistency. The more consistent you can be, the more successful you'll be. When we look at failed things in social communication or in relationships, because remember, it's not just online, it's because you weren't consistent. People, managers fail, leaders fail because they don't consistently communicate what they need to communicate. Be consistent. That's the trend you're looking for. Consistency builds the trust. Without consistency, there can be no trust. Because think about it, if you're in a relationship and your partner said, well, see you tonight, and they don't arrive, and then you see them 2 days later, well, there was no consistency in that, and I don't think you're going to be in a relationship with that person for long. So you need to be consistent. Don't be boring, but you need to be consistent. So what you say, and I probably said it earlier, if you're going to decide to post 3 times a day, post 3 times a day, every day. Consistency builds a success. Think about a sportsman. If you're running and practicing to do a marathon, you can't do it one day and then not the next, and then decide if you're going to do it the day after that. You have to be consistent. Consistency delivers those results. That's the trend that you need. Oh, and just in case you're looking for another trend, service. Be of service to people. Because remember, 80% of our success is about listening. What are you going to do for people? How are you going to be that leader you promised them to be when you said, follow me on Twitter? How are you serving people? What do they want to hear? It goes back to listening. Listen to what they want, serve them, give them what they need, and you will build your influence accordingly. When you're serving people, people will talk about you. They will never talk about you if you weren't serving them. And if you look at word of mouth happens in many ways. But in social communication, or what you're going to be doing with your communication through the various platforms, the more you serve people, the more they're going to talk about you. You're going to grow your influence. The challenge is there. It's pretty simple. You don't have to spend too much time on this. What you do need to be is consistent. And from your initial consistency, you will find that you can then decide how much time you want to add on a daily basis into your social communication because you've seen the results. Don't overdo it, because overdoing it implies that you're actually going to burn out at some stage. So don't allow yourself to burn out. Pace yourself carefully and be consistent in that. We'll see you out there. Everything the best with your communication. Thank you.